I'm Elaine Reyes at the United Nations headquarters in New York, and this is UN Insider.
Coming up.
We are at a decisive moment for the Palestinian and Israeli people and for the fate of the entire region.
Urgent calls for a ceasefire as Israel begins a military operation in Rafah. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians scramble to evacuate, and the UN expresses grave concern about the movement of humanitarian aid. Conflict in Sudan intensifies. A look at the crisis and the effort to help some of the millions of people forced to leave their homes. Restoring the rainforests of the ocean. Chinese scientists look to save a crucial underwater ecosystem. Next.
The conflict between Israel and Hamas has raged for 7 months. Hope for a potential ceasefire emerged this week, but has not resulted in an agreement. And Israel is pressing ahead with military operations in Rafah, where more than 1 million Palestinians are sheltering.
We're deeply concerned about Israel's increased military activities in Rafah, where most of Gaza's people have fled for safety. An estimated 30,000 to 40,000 people have left Rafah for Khan Yunis and Deir al-Balah, but more than 1.4 million people remain at risk in Rafah, including 600,000 children. Already one of Rafah's 3 hospitals, the Al-Najjar Hospital, has had to shut down.
Israel says it is conducting a limited military operation. This does not appear to be the full-scale Rafah offensive many have feared, but it has already caused major disruption to the UN's humanitarian aid efforts. Shudaja is monitoring developments inside the UN and has more on our top story. Deja.
Yes, Elaine. This week, the UN started by witnessing the drama unfolding in Gaza Strip. New York time Monday noon, right during the briefing, we received the news that Hamas accepted a ceasefire deal with Israel in a looming full-scale assault in Rafah city, where tens of thousands of civilians were ordered to evacuate. The spokesperson did not answer our request for comments, waiting the response from Israel, and he was right. Hours later, the joy and the celebration in Rafah city turned to grave and disappointment. Israel said it was not the deal they preferred and would continue its Rafah operation. Within 24 hours, UN Secretary General Mr. Antonio Guterres issued 3 different statements on the same situation. The first written one, he urged both parties to go the extra mile needed to make an agreement come true and stop the present suffering. Later, he warned Rafah situation during his meeting with Italian President Mattarella.
A ground invasion in Rafah would be intolerable because of its devastating humanitarian consequences and because of its destabilizing impact in the region.
The next morning, when the news came that 2 critical humanitarian border crossings, Al-Rafah and Karim Absalam or Karim Shalom were shut, Antonio Guterres issued a strong on-camera statement.
After more than 1,100 Israelis killed in the Hamas terror attacks of 7 October, after more than 34,000 Palestinians killed in Gaza, haven't we seen enough? Haven't civilians suffered enough death and destruction? Make no mistake, a full-scale assault on Rafah would be a human catastrophe. Countless more civilian casualties, countless more families forced to flee yet again with nowhere safe to go, because there is no safe place in Gaza. Even the best friends of Israel are clear. An assault on Rafah would be a strategic mistake, a political calamity, and a humanitarian nightmare. I appeal to all those with influence over Israel to do everything in their power to help avert even more tragedy.
Well, how bad is the situation? Andre de Domenico, head of UN Humanitarian Department, OCHA's office in the occupied Palestinian territory, explained to us.
On fuel in particular, as you can imagine, humanitarian operation cannot run without fuel, as simple as this. So unless the supply of fuel resumes, all the humanitarian communication and banking services will hold completely in a matter of days. The lack of fuel will affect life-critical sector across the street.
Then what is the biggest challenge for UN humanitarian operation in Gaza now?
What is the biggest challenge now? Is that because...
The biggest challenge is that there's conflict still going on. The biggest challenge is that, you know, there's fighting still going on. That's the biggest challenge. You know, we're trying to run a humanitarian operation in the middle of a conflict zone, right? Where the civilians are not protected, where civilian infrastructure is not respected, where hospitals have become military zones. Those are the challenges.
Now, General Assembly is having the emergency special session on the issue of Palestine, and here is the draft resolution. Previously this week, Israeli Ambassador Gilad Erdan threatened that if Palestine status changed, US will stop funding UN and its agencies. How would the UN respond?
The Israeli ambassador said if the vote has been approved, he expects the US to completely stop funding the UN and its institution according to US domestic law. Does the Secretary General worried if a, let's say, admission of Palestine in UN has been passed in the GA would result in the funding issue of the UN?
There is a process through which new members are admitted, right? That process is firmly in the hands of member states. Member states will take the decisions they take based on their policies. It's not for us to comment.
And that means the stop funding?
It's not for us to comment at this point.
Well, three things in this resolution drew our attention. First, this resolution particularly mentioned that according to UN Charter Article 4, the state of Palestine is qualified for membership. This is one of the reasons US claimed to oppose the admission. Second, it recommends Security Council to reconsider its position on this issue, which means the General Assembly asked the Security Council to discuss the issue all over again with the pretext that Palestine is qualified for UN membership. And third, it grants Palestine more rights in the UN system, even it's not a full member. But I have to remind you again, a General Assembly resolution is not binding. However, it could show the international opinion and put pressure to countries that oppose the admission of Palestine as UN full member. But how would this affect the situation on ground? We shall still have to see. And that's all from me. Elaine.
Shudaja, thanks. A new report from the UN shines a light on the human and economic toll the conflict in Gaza is having across all Palestinian territories.
The Human Development Index for Palestine in general, not just for Gaza, for Palestinian territories, East Jerusalem, West Bank, and Gaza, have regressed by 20 years. And for Gaza alone, it has regressed by more than 40 years. We are back in the 80s almost for Gaza.
The stark assessment comes from the UN Development Program and the Economic and Social Commission for West Asia. Over the last 6 months, at least 5% of Gaza's population has either been killed or wounded. An additional 1.74 million people have been plunged into poverty. And gains made in education, healthcare, and life expectancy have all fallen to levels not seen in decades, wiping out some $50 billion in investment.
This is unprecedented. We haven't seen anything like this since 1945, since Second World War. That intensity in such a short time and the massive scale of destruction.
Officials say it could take until the year 2040 or longer for Gaza's infrastructure and economy to recover from the conflict. it will be a daunting task. 72% of all homes in Gaza have been destroyed, along with 90% of all commercial and other buildings. And if the conflict continues for another 3 months, the overall economic loss could reach nearly 30%.
We have today 37 million tons of debris that needs to be removed, managed, recycled to allow space for those temporary shelters and other structures to be established in order to resume normal life, some sort of normalcy for the Palestinians in Gaza.
For more than a year, Sudan has been in the grips of fighting between two rival factions. More than 25 million Sudanese are in need of humanitarian assistance. And as the fighting spreads, there is growing concern centered on the Darfur region.
Time is running out to prevent starvation in Darfur, as intensifying clashes in North Darfur's capital, El Fasher, are hindering our efforts to deliver vital food assistance into the region. Access constraints are jeopardizing our plans to provide vital assistance to over 700,000 people ahead of the rainy season, when many roads across Darfur become impassable. WFP currently has 8,000 tons of food supplies ready to move in Chad, ready to transport, but isn't able to do so because of these constraints.
Fighting has forced millions of people to leave their homes in Sudan. An estimated 20,000 are forced to flee every day, most of them children. Refugees have escaped to neighboring countries. Benina Karibe visited a camp in Chad that is housing more than 150,000 people.
This is Adre's spontaneous site. It looks like an organized settlement, but it's not. This is where Sudanese refugees who've crossed into Chad through the Adre border point set up. Bashar Mohammed is one of the new arrivals. We find him setting up where he, his 5 wives and 15 children will call home for the next coming months. He is from Kondebe in Sudan.
Everywhere was closed, roads were blocked. There was no food, no water, nobody could come or leave.
A few meters away, another family offloads their few belongings from the horse cart. Just like Bashar, they too have just arrived. They're among hundreds, sometimes even 1,000 refugees who cross daily into Chad via Adre.
We have the government there, and the government registers them at the border. And the second step, it will be vaccination with the MSF. That is the second point. And we have as well the information desk, where we have some people, the staff from Red Cross, and we ask more questions and tell them which kind of services are available in Adre site.
At this site, Bashar joins the long queue of refugees waiting to be relocated to an organized settlement where they can access proper housing, schools for their children, and a lot more. But that queue can take longer than the 3 months recommended by the UN Refugee Agency. Zara Mohammed Idris arrived here last year in June after heavy fighting in her home in El Geneina.
I got registered by the UNHCR. I am now waiting to be relocated. In the meantime, I look for odd jobs to do here in Adre, such as house chores or in construction sites, so that I can provide for my family.
There are more than 150,000 refugees at this spontaneous site. Here, they survive on the bare minimum. The Refugee Agency and its partners provides them with food, security, water, and basic medical services. The very nature of these settlements doesn't allow the refugees access to much, but according to them, the little they get here is better than being stuck back at home.
I am grateful to God for the humanitarian agencies. They give us protection, we can get food, we get what we need in the food rations, and now we are working towards having our children go to school.
The UNHCR says the slow response by donors is crippling their response to this ongoing humanitarian crisis.
At the moment I can tell you, we have around 5 liters per person per day, that is not enough because the standard is around 20 liters per person per day. So in this site we have only 5. And then second is the access to latrines. The latrine can be an issue as well.
As the refugees anxiously await their relocation, their hopes for a better future remain steadfast. But those hopes are pegged on how quickly the international community responds to their plight. Penina Karibes, CGTN, in Adri, Chad.
Let's take a look at some of the other global issues on the UN's itinerary this week.
Outer space is the global commons and holds the shared dreams of all humanity. Its peaceful uses, enhanced cooperation, and improved governance are the shared aspirations of all countries and the general trend of the times.
China's ambassador to the UN detailed China's stance on setting international guidelines for weapons in space. Russia recently vetoed a draft resolution submitted by the US and Japan. China abstained from the vote, saying the measure lacked balance. Peng Liyuan, wife of Chinese President Xi Jinping, visited UNESCO headquarters in Paris this week. Peng expressed China's willingness to work with UNESCO to create a better future for women and girls globally. UN officials say heavy rains and flash floods have impacted more than 700,000 people across East Africa. Refugee camps have been particularly hit hard. The UN is working to provide humanitarian aid.
Coming up.
A
crucial issue for us in reference to the topic of climate change, the problems of biodiversity loss, and above all, the consequences this generates with natural disasters.
Sobre todo, las consecuencias que esto genera con los desastres naturales, ¿no?
UN Insider.
Whether it's about your education, the home you live in, or the items you buy, your money has a story to tell. Because every business story is a human story. Global Business.
Striking a balance between preserving natural resources and spurring sustainable economic development, that is a challenge for many developing nations. Peru is no exception. I sat down with Peru's ambassador to the UN, Victor Garcia. Ambassador, Peru has a long history at the United Nations and is a founding member. What are your mission's top priorities at the United Nations?
Como miembro fundador de la Organización de las Naciones Unidas, nos ha interesado, y con mayor énfasis ahora, el de preservar y defender la paz internacional y garantizar la soberanía independencia e integridad territorial de los pueblos. Un segundo elemento que nos parece sumamente importante es la lucha contra la pobreza y el acceso del bienestar social a los denominados pueblos oriundos o pueblos originarios. En esa línea, y por razones específicamente vinculadas con el país, estamos profundamente interesados en la lucha contra el narcotráfico, la trata de personas y sobre todo contra el crimen transnacional, que de alguna manera establece islas de dominio en nuestros territorios, en vastos territorios, y han puesto ya en jaque a los estados. Creo que esos serían los grandes lineamientos que el Perú tiene, ¿no?
We are less than 6 years away from the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Where do you feel your country is making great progress, and what are some of the areas where you need to do a little bit more work?
Lo importante que ha llevado a cabo el Perú es ajustar sus planes, programas y acciones de carácter nacional a los grandes, los 17 lineamientos, establecidos por la Organización de Naciones Unidas. Ese ha sido, creo yo, un primer logro. El segundo logro ha sido el poner en marcha al país, sobre todo en las áreas sociales, educación, salud y sobre todo el fomento al bienestar a las poblaciones, más excluidas. Y un tema que nos parece crucial es el referencia al tema del cambio climático, los problemas de la disminución de la biodiversidad y sobre todo las consecuencias que esto genera con los desastres naturales, ¿no?
What has Peru learned from some of the disasters in the past, from El Niño and from the dengue fever epidemic of the 1990s?
Ha aprendido a mejorar sus mecanismos de prevención, ha mejorado de manera sustantiva los organismos técnicos, ha adiestrado a la población a hacer frente a estos desastres, pero fundamentalmente, por ser algo que nos afecta de manera directa, nos hemos preocupado por tratar y eventualmente conseguir un liderazgo en la región para que este tema no sea uno de carácter, digamos, aleatorio o secundario, sino sea un tema principal en la agenda de esos países y en la agenda de la región, ¿no?
China and Peru have deep ties in history that goes back more than 5 decades. They both come from ancient civilizations, a lot of history and culture. These days, there's a lot of trade and investment and a big, massive infrastructure project, which is a port in Peru. How would you describe ties between China and Peru right now?
Sentimos mucho orgullo que la comunidad china sea el grupo migrante más importante, querido y respetado en nuestro país. Desde 1849, cuando el primer grupo de chinos llegaron, supieron adentrarse en el alma de los peruanos con rapidez y a lo largo de este tiempo han logrado incorporarse en el mundo del comercio, la industria, las artes, el deporte. Nos han dominado y gobernado a través de su gastronomía. Debo decirle que en el Perú se estima que hay alrededor de 10.000 restaurantes. Ha sido muy importante para nosotros el poder celebrar el Tratado de Libre Comercio en el año 2010 y esto por ahora se va a coronar probablemente en noviembre cuando se termine de construir este megapuerto de Chancay que va a colocar al Perú en el centro de la atención del transporte marítimo, que va a permitir alrededor de 1.500 puestos de trabajo y otros 1.500 puestos adicionales. Pero sobre todo es la primera gran piedra seguramente para otras grandes obras de inversión china en el Perú que los recibe con los brazos abiertos como fue en 1849.
Your country is set to host APEC later this year. What does Peru hope to show APEC members about the diversity and all that Peru has to offer?
Esta va a ser la tercera oportunidad que en el Perú se celebra APEC, con algunas diferencias. Esta vez no se va a realizar en un escenario, sino nos vamos a desplegar en buena parte del territorio nacional. Van a haber seis lugares simultáneos. Vamos a tener el honor de recibir probablemente al presidente Xi Jinping y llega en un momento vital. Creo que hoy el comercio internacional de alguna manera permite acercar más a los pueblos y atiza la necesidad de generar mecanismos de comprensión y de tolerancia. Lo que a veces no se puede conseguir a través de las palabras, probablemente se podrá conseguir a través de las transacciones económicas que son las que finalmente generan bienestar y progreso. Entonces, vemos con mucho optimismo a APEC por lo importante que resulta para el mundo toda esta zona que recorre el Océano Pacífico y que países como China, el Japón, etcétera, en el caso nuestro, el Perú, coparticipan, ¿no es cierto?, como una ventana al mundo diciendo aquí estamos y por supuesto esperándolos para prosperar juntos, ¿no?
Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us.
Coming up,
we're facing the most important issue, which is the warming of the climate. The rise in sea temperature causes coral bleaching, making corals more susceptible to death.
UN Insider.
Making sense of the overwhelming wave of information means cutting through the noise to shine a light on the heart of the story and making room for new perspectives. True understanding means the ability to see events from more than one side. I'm Liu Xin, and this is The Point.
Coral reefs are found in more than 100 countries and territories around the world. About 25% of the fish in our oceans depend on coral reefs. But these diverse ecosystems are in danger. An estimated 60% are currently under threat. They're known as the rainforest of the ocean. Coral reefs are home to some of the most diverse ecosystems in the world. But climate change and other challenges threaten reefs around the globe. Tao Zhufeng introduces us to some Chinese scientists working to restore corals in the South China Sea.
This is the vast underwater world of the South China Sea. Many of these coral reefs you see are repaired and planted by scientists from the South China Sea Institute of Oceanology and the Chinese Academy of Sciences. Meet Jiang Lei, a scientist from the institute whose main task is to study and categorize coral. His job requires him to travel between the South China Sea and Guangzhou.
We can observe various phenomena when cultivating or selecting coral in the field, but to understand why these phenomena occur, further in-depth analysis is required. Our laboratory in Guangzhou will conduct basic analytical research relating to this. This section mainly consists of specimens belonging to various species of coral skeleton collected from the South China Sea. We rely on them to further confirm the species of coral and understand the biodiversity in the area.
So far, the institute has restored coral in an area spanning over 30 hectares in the waters. But Jiang Lei says scientists around the world face the same problem.
Currently, we're facing the most important issue, which is the warming of the climate. The rise in sea temperature causes coral bleaching, making corals more susceptible to death. The bright yellow, small round spheres we see under the microscope are symbiotic partners of coral, known as zooxanthellae. When coral encounters marine heat waves, they expel the zooxanthellae from their bodies, a phenomenon we call coral bleaching.
Jiang Lei says scientists are now trying to solve this problem by planting naturally grown coral species more resilient to heat, or by trying to produce them through hybridization. He says China is increasing efforts to protect coral.
In our country, especially in the past decade, the best efforts in coral and coral reef protection have been through legislation. Secondly, in recent years, our country has invested a significant amount of research funding to support initiatives such as coral reef restoration and conservation.
China started to restore coral more than 20 years ago. People's awareness of this undertaking and its technologies have grown a lot since then. In the future, Chinese scientists, along with peers around the world, hope to restore coral in a more effective and faster manner, and also in a larger scale. Cao Zhufeng, CGTN, Guangzhou.
I'm Elaine Reyes at UN headquarters in New York. Thanks for being a UN Insider.